Hello everyone, and welcome to our daily vlog at Kimmel Bay Church. The theme for today is moving forwards in our Christian lives and not backwards. And we're going to be exploring the life of a Bible character called Mephibosheth. And we're looking at 2 Samuel chapters 4, 9 and 21. Now, we start our lives in very different places, don't we? And as newborn babies, we've got no real control over where we live and who our parents are. And here in the UK, in many ways, we're very privileged. We have food, healthcare system, a free education system, and we're largely safe from natural disasters. And we have many opportunities in life too. But despite this relatively good start compared to the rest of the world, there are also lots of individual tragedies too. Things can go very badly wrong. For example, in 2020 there were 5,224 suicides in the UK. 3/4 of them were men. And at our last men's meeting, Joe Rogers came from Scotland to tell us about his difficult start in life, where he faced poverty and parents who were alcoholics. He talked about his life of drug addiction, of crime, and eventually his time in prison. He also watched his brother die of a drugs overdose too. And his whole life just went backwards further and further, until finally he met some Christians that halted his decline, and he eventually became a believer, putting his trust in Jesus. And then he started moving forward again. So let's look at Mithibosheth. I'll try and pronounce his name right as often as I can. We're going to look at this guy whose direction in life changed many times. Now, his grandfather was King Saul, and his father was Jonathan, David's best friend. And when Saul and Jonathan were killed in a battle, David became king. And it was the custom in those days that the first task of a new king was to get rid of the whole family of the previous king, so there'd be no rivals to his rule. And fearing for the child's safety, Mephibosheth's nurse picked him up and fled. But in her panic, she dropped him, and he succumbed to a terrible injury that left him disabled. In fact, we read that he was permanently lame in both feet. Now, here was this guy, Mephibosheth. He started off with everything he needed, but now we have this terrible injury. And then he was taken to a place called Lo-debar, which means a land of nothing. And here he was, a cripple, helpless, in the poorest part of the land. He must have felt lost, forgotten, and without hope too. Now, after many years of wars and rebellions, David finally returned to Jerusalem, where he had time to stop and think. And he remembered his friendship with Jonathan and a covenant they'd made, a promise of lasting friendship, and also a promise to look after each other's families too. So David asked Ziba, who was one of Saul's servants, if there was anyone still alive from Saul's family who he could show God's kindness to. And he was absolutely delighted when Ziba told him that Jonathan's son was still alive. So Methibosheth was duly summoned to court. He must have been terrified, expecting to be put to death like so many of his family. And in verse 8 we read, he bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" His response was clearly a correct one, showing great humility. And David said, "Don't be afraid, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." So Mephibosheth was honoured by the king and welcomed into David's court. He was given David's protection, even though many others demanded the death of all Saul's relatives. He also returned the family lands, and he instructed Ziba to farm the land for him. So thanks to David, his life went back on track. He went from feeling hopeless and forgotten to being close to the king. Now, leaders often like to project an image of strength in their teams, don't they? They choose the strongest, the cleverest, and the most handsome. But here was David bringing a crippled man into the family, and a man who was also a great threat to him, the heir of Saul's throne. I suppose in the same way, Jesus himself didn't choose the wealthy and the strong, did he? He chose the weak, the poor, the blind, and the sick. And he reaches out in our weakness and sin and our pointless existence to raise us up so that we can be under his protection and in his presence too. Now, our story doesn't end here. We read in 2 Samuel 19 that while David was away fighting, Mephibosheth stayed at home. This potentially could have been a bad move, because Ziba spoke to David against Mephibosheth, questioning his loyalty, and even suggesting that Mephibosheth was plotting to take his throne. So when David returned, he wasn't too impressed, and he asked him why he hadn't followed him into battle. And Mephibosheth explained that his servant had taken his donkey, so in his lameness he couldn't follow. You might think, pardon the pun, that it was a bit of a lame excuse. But David noticed his unsheveled state. He hadn't washed himself or washed his clothes. And the passage even said he hasn't trimmed his moustache until his master came home. And he was also clearly overjoyed to see David again. And he pledged his loyalty. He said, "All my family deserve to be put to death, but instead you have given me the right to eat at your table. I have no right to ask for any more favours from your majesty. Let Ziba have all my property. It's enough for me that your majesty has come home safely." So he said all the right things, didn't he? And the story ends well, because he continued to show loyalty and humility, and David forgave him. And he continued to eat at David's table. And later on in 2 Samuel 21, we read that David saved him again from being executed by the Gibeonites, who wanted to kill everyone connected with Saul. So what can we learn from his life? Well, we're a bit like Mephibosheth, in that God sees our needs. He reaches out to us, even though we're spiritually crippled and sinful. And he promises to save us and to guide us. He also always fulfills his promises and continues to love us even when we let him down. But we still have free will. We can still choose our own path in life. So we need to ask ourselves, are we moving forward with Christ, or are we staying still, or could we actually be going backwards? In 2 Corinthians 9, Paul talks about our lives as being like a race. And he says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. And then 3 really good verses to finish. Proverbs 4:25. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Do not turn to the left or to the right. Turn your foot away from evil. Then Hebrews 12. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And then thirdly, one of my favourite verses from Isaiah 40. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So a challenge for us today. At the end of our lives here on earth, will we be able to say, like Paul, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. So there we are, the life of Methibosheth. Lots to think about, and have a great day, everyone. Bye for now.